So I'm going to start by asking you all a question. How many architects have we got in the room? Can you just put a hand up if you're an architect? Okay, well that's really, really disappointing because I think actually you're not recognising your role as caregivers of young children who are actually building children's brains. And so if you think about what architects do and think about what you do in terms of early brain development, then actually let's start putting those two together. So the one thing that I will add to that is that I'm aware that there's a number of children who have Portuguese as their first language. If you go on the Harvard University website, the Centre for the Developing Child, you can find the 5 steps for brain building in Portuguese. And I just think that is such a lovely asset for you in Jersey. So I suggest you have a look at that sometime. So I'm not going to take any more time up because we've got a lot of fabulous speakers this evening. So Julie.
Good evening. One of the most important jobs that we all have working in the early years is to support children to communicate effectively, leading to the development of good reading and writing skills. We know what research already tells us, that good communication and language will lead to better outcomes for our children, not just educationally, but in life. In 2018, the Education Endowment Foundation produced a guidance report called Preparing for Literacy, Improving Communication, Language and Literacy in the Early Years. In this guidance, there are 7 recommendations that we can all use to make a significant difference to children's language. The guidance focuses on sound pedagogy and evidence-based approaches that we can use to shape and inform our practice and future work. There are a few on the table, but I'm afraid there's not one for everyone, but they're easy to find online if you want to have a look. Last year, we were fortunate enough with a bid from Jersey Premium Funding to really embed the use of welcome at Rougebury-on-School. Taking recommendation number 7, we were able to fund a speech and language therapist to work closely alongside an experienced nursery teacher and her team, implementing the Welcome toolkit to meet the individual communication and language needs of all children in the nursery class. I am delighted that this evening Cathy and Jade are here to share with you the success and challenges of what we have called the Language Enrichment Project.
Hi everybody, I'm Jade, the nursery teacher at Rougebury-on.
Hello, I'm Cathy, speech and language therapist.
And we're here tonight to tell you a little bit about the Nursery Language Enrichment Project that took place last year in my classroom in the summer term for about 6 weeks. So just a little bit about my class last year. There were 27 children in total, and as you can see it was quite boy heavy. There was 55% of the class were Jersey Premium and 59% of the class had English as an additional language. There was 11% which had special education needs, and as you can see there it says 30% were known to speech and language therapy. That's because actually as a result of this project and the work that took place, we ended up referring in 2 or 3 more children at the end, so that number actually did rise a little bit. 18% of the class were accessing the early years inclusion team, and 14% were accessing some sort of wellbeing support at school as well. So it was quite a challenging cohort with lots of complex needs. Within the class there was myself, 1 class teacher and 2 nursery officers. And the on-entry data showed us that actually majority of children came into us 12 months behind age-related expectations for the areas of development. Some children were actually more like 18 months plus behind. So yes, we did have class with lots of need.
Okay, So just to set the scene, we know the ability to communicate, to say what you want to say, and to understand what others are saying is fundamental to life chances. And I've just put a little quote here from Berko: speech, language and communication needs impact on social and emotional development and later in life and education, employability and mental health. So as Julie said in her introduction, the starting point of this project was furthering the welcome training that I provided in November before the project started. And I know lots of you here are familiar with the project, but there'll be others of you who are not sure what it is, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of information. It's an evidence-based language enrichment programme. It's a screen that screens understanding and expressive language skills of children in their first language, ideally. It allows you to monitor progress, and it provides bespoke language activities linked to the findings of the screen. And the input happens in 2 waves. The first wave is where weaknesses across the whole class are woven into the planning. And the second wave is for targeted children with identified difficulties from the screen, and they are supported via time to talk groups, which are led by the teaching team.
After Cathy delivered her training to us in November, myself and my team went back to nursery, and we did try and start using Welcome. However, due to the challenging cohort and the number of adults that we had in the class, we just found it really hard to get started to physically start screening the children. So we knew we needed some help, and that's when the project started in the summer term.
Yeah, so we had 6 weeks. On a Monday, I was in the morning, and I was primarily in the classroom. And on Tuesday, I was in the afternoon, and we were mostly outdoors and in the playground. We had 3 hours of planning time, and some of that was snatch time with Jade, and some was my own planning. And then we had some resource-making opportunities as well. Okay, so the Welcome Early Years Toolkit was very much the beginning of our journey for this language enrichment programme. Jade and I together spent time analysing the screen results. But I'm just going to pick out a few of the different things that we did. So that Welcome was the beginning, but we did lots of other things following Welcome. We did key elements were things like the Team Teach Welcome Time to Talk groups. So together, we would run groups and we would share who was leading and who was observing the Time to Talk groups. And of course, this has lots of benefits. For example, it helps you demonstrate key strategies to facilitate communication with the children. We were weaving language targets across the entire school day. An example included in the playground, all adults highlighting action words during ball play outside. The setting was already using Makaton signing, but we enriched this by adding Makaton symbols to some of the signage around the room. We also observed that making small changes in the environment promoted oral language opportunities for the children. So Jade moved the role play units together, and she pushed them to make a kitchen island in the middle of the role play area. And the result, the children now play face-to-face, and this has facilitated many more interactions, so you can see that even children love a kitchen island. And then there was some specialist support, and this was via 2 strands. So a small number of children required increasingly individualised programmes, and this was to accelerate progress and enable other children to reach their potential. So time was spent with individual members of the teaching team, working on specific targets for these children and troubleshooting. And the second strand to the specialist support was helping to identify children with hidden difficulties. And the examples we had where English as an additional language was masking a significant developmental language disorder.
So I learnt so much from the project. The whole way through, Cathy was sharing lots of research with myself and my team. And as a result now, I'm so much more confident sharing key messages with parents around bilingualism, for example, encouraging parents to keep chatting their own language at home, keeping their own language alive. I learnt lots about DLD and language delay and how to support children in my class with these needs. I have a much greater awareness of communication-friendly spaces, and I'm now more considerate of how my children might feel when they come and sit in my little break-off room from the main nursery. We have a quiet room, and there's always, 2 or 3 children that tend to take quite a long time to choose where they might want to sit. And previously I might have said, come on, quick, come and find a space to sit. Whereas now I'm thinking of myself when I walk into a restaurant, and actually I'm the worst culprit for taking a little bit of time to choose where I'm going to feel most comfortable, maybe with my back, not facing the door or facing the window, whatever it might be. So I'm just a bit more considerate now of how my children might feel coming to sit down, and giving them a bit extra time to do that. And I have an increased understanding of how speech, language and communication difficulties affect children later in life, with their well-being, with employability, and how important early intervention is.
Yeah, and for me, it's always a learning opportunity to see how speech, language, communication difficulties in an assessment translate into the classroom and the playground. And to see how, for example, the welcome screen results link to the children's wellbeing and involvement skills. And also, it was a reminder to myself again about, reminding me about the reduced life experiences and play experiences for many of the children within the setting, and this prompted me to build more free play language games into my Time to Talk groups.
So as you can probably hear, we felt like the project was a great success, mainly as it allowed our whole team and Kathy to work together, and it really made us invested in the language milestones of the cohort. All myself and my staff understood exactly where the children were and where their children's next step were in their language. And it led to celebrations when we could hear children finally using his, her correctly, or using word endings, for example. So yeah, that was a really great success for us. And the next success was Chloe. She was in my class last year. She started in September with no English at all. She was a really happy girl, but she did become quite easily distracted. Might take her 5 or so minutes to get to the bathroom to wash her hands, because she would stop at everything on the way and look at everything on the way. And at the beginning of the year and through lots of the year, she did have quite low levels of involvement. So for those who are familiar, you can see actually from the screen results, in a period of, there was 6 months uplift in her language development in a period of 3 months, which was amazing. As Kathy mentioned earlier, we did actually identify some hidden language difficulties in Chloe as well, and as a result we referred her into speech and language. But the biggest success really for Chloe was actually seeing her involvement and her well-being really rise, and she was engaging much more in activities in the classroom, so that was fantastic.
Okay, so for the last week of our language enrichment project, Jade and I spent time preparing the setting for our readiness for the children starting in September. So here I'll just pick out a few things that we did. We trained a new member of the team, a bilingual TA in Welcome. We linked core books to language targets. We planned and selected Tier 1 vocabulary to be taught in the first term. And Jade completed a staff inset training around communication, and she was telling her team about the work that we've done.
So yeah, in total I gained so much knowledge and understanding from the project, and I'm really inspired to continue my professional development in this area. As a team, we are really committed to promoting the children's communication and language and giving them lots of opportunities. We're really lucky that actually at the moment the project has continued, and we've got a really experienced early years teacher with us, Nikki Hay, so the project is still ongoing. And to be honest, this is just the beginning of our language enrichment journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jade and Kathy. That's absolutely fabulous to think about what's happening here locally. Can I suggest that we just pick up on the point of continuing professional development, because on your tables you've got a sheet that if you're interested in acquiring CPD, continuing professional development points, for accreditation for attending this seminar, then all you need to do is sign up on the sheet and you will get points for accreditation towards your CPD. So feel free to do that. So this evening is very much focused on the word gap and thinking about children who may have less advantage in terms of their language, etc., than some other children. And I think what's really interesting is that as a new piece of research out from the Centre for Family Research at the University of Cambridge, and they looked at babies of 7 months. And they looked at the average number of words that were spoken to children per hour. And mums spoke 1,351 words. How many do you think dads spoke? 666. And I just think that's really interesting in terms of the language that children hear and who they hear it from. So, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Jean Grace to you. And Jean is an absolute guru, specialist, expert, whatever word you want to use, thinking about both early years, thinking about children's well-being, thinking about special educational needs. You know, she's been communication champion. I know that she's been round every English local authority, you know, convincing some really important people of the importance of communication. She's done a whole host of different things, and you know, I'm sure her biog will be in your packs, so you can pick that up. But just picking up from Jade and Kathy's point around the Burko report, Jean chaired Burko 10 years on. And so, you know, it's really important in terms of thinking, okay, so there was a report 10 years ago, what actually has happened in that interim period? She's written lots of other reports, lots of books, articles, etc. You know, and I know that I've had kind of phone calls from people in the audience and contact saying, I've just read Time to Talk, you know, can I come to the seminar? Which has been absolutely delightful. So Jane, I'm delighted to welcome you to Jersey.
So I'm going to talk about closing the word gap. Closing the word gap, the title of this evening's seminar, it's a phrase that's become quite current. You'll hear it about, it's got into the ether. One of the reasons is that English politicians, at least, I can't speak for your politicians, but English politicians are quite simple creatures who like a simple slogan, and so they kind of get closing the word gap. It's nice, it's simple and snappy, and they can go with it. But what does it mean? We will explore that. I want to begin with what the word gap means, then I'm going to go on to some really interesting science. I'm not a researcher, but I love to learn about research. Some really interesting science on how young children learn to communicate. And then from then, share with you some of the work that's being done by many different agencies, including the English government and the BBC, to produce a campaign, in effect, to target parents of young children to give key messages about the importance of the way they interact with their children from birth onwards in order to promote their language development. So to begin with, what do we mean? Well, the word gap came originally from a rather old piece of research. It was one of your references on your list. It was a study by Hart and Risley in 1995 in America. And what they did was they had researchers sit in children's living rooms up to the age of 4, counting the number of words spoken to children, rather like your male-female one. And they found that there was a big difference in the number of words heard by children according to their levels of social disadvantage. So they found that if you were in a not very well-off home, on average, your child would hear about 600 words per hour, rather like the males in the Cambridge study. But if you're in a very well-off home, you would hear over 2,000 words spoken to the child per hour. Then they added up all those words and came up with this idea that by the age of 4, there is a 30 million word gap in the number of words heard by children in their homes. So that is the origin of closing the word gap. And closing the word gap fundamentally came from this study of disadvantage, and it's about closing the gap between less well-off children and their peers. And the number of words heard in turn leads to a cumulative effect on the number of words the child knows themselves and uses, and then that translates into poorer reading results at school and so on. Now, this study has been criticised, not without reason, partly because it's America, partly because it's old, and partly because if you were a not very well-off family and you had someone in a suit sitting in the corner of your living room with a clipboard counting every word spoken to you, you probably wouldn't say very much, would you? However, it has been replicated, and it's found the gap isn't as big as 30 million, but it is significant. However, it's not absolutely linked to social disadvantage. Some researchers in this country found that there are many very well-off families that hardly talk at all. They're quiet families, and for some reason they found the families of surgeons were not very chatty. I don't know why. Perhaps they're exhausted after talking all day on an 8-hour operation, but anyway, they were quiet. And this brings home that in this aspect of how much we talk to children, it's what you do, not what you earn, that counts. There are many disadvantaged families who absolutely know that they should talk to their child and read books with them and interact and play. And equally, there are some very well-off families that don't do that. Or are a lot of people talk to me about what they call the cash-rich, time-poor families. So you may have children that you work with whose families have the affluence, the money, but they haven't the time. They're busy paying huge mortgages or whatever, and so that they may not have time to spend with their own children, or they may use childcare, a great deal of childcare, and not be spending time themselves. So it's not a total disadvantage link. This closing the word gap applies across the social gradient. However, it does exist in the UK, and this study is called the Millennium Cohort. Researchers have been tracking the progress of thousands of children born in the UK at the millennium and giving them assessments and tests as they get older. And when they were 5, these children were assessed on a language measure, a vocabulary measure. And I'd like you to just turn to someone near you and chat very quickly, come up with a guesstimate. How big do you think the gap was in months at the age of 5 for these UK children between the most and the least well-off families? What do you think that gap was? And as you know, you may know, you may not know, but just speculate. Okay, if you could just bring that one to a close. The gap was 19 months. Anybody spot on? Oh, very good, very good. But 19 months, if you're mathematicians, 19 months as a proportion of 60 months, you're age 5, that's a heck of a proportion of your life, isn't it? You know, it's a third of your life. And then that is why primary schools are from that point on, and then secondary schools trying to catch up with that huge gap. So it does exist in the UK, though, as I said, it's not specific to social disadvantage. Numbers appear to be rising. I don't know what you're finding here in Jersey, but most people tell me they're seeing more children starting in reception or in nursery with not talking in sentences and so on. Head teachers are very concerned about it, and health visitors at their 2-year check, when they do the statutory 2-year check in the Healthy Child programme, they are finding a rise, and they're reporting that every year that there are more children. And there is no shortage of theories as to why that might be. So there are theories about the time children are spending on screens, or the time parents are spending on screens. There are theories about our busy, busy lives and the cash-rich, time-poor families. There is even a theory that the introduction of central heating might have led to a national decline in spoken language standards. Just have a chat about that very quickly. Why might that be? Why might the introduction of central heating have led to a change? Okay. Forgive me for breaking in again. Anybody want to hazard a theory? Hazard a guess?
Is it that you're all in one room with the phone?
That's right, yeah. I was brought up in the north of England, in a very cold, wet place, and we had one coal fire in the living room and two huge night storage heaters in the hall. So we were all in the living room. And where are children now? In their, well, particularly in their bedrooms, aren't they? You know, this is most alarming. Is it saying something? Oh, your device will restart to update outside of active hours. No, I do not want it to restart. Hang on. And now we've lost the doodah. I have to stop it restarting when I can't find a mouse. Yeah, got there. Has this ever happened to you? It's gone. It's okay. It's gone. It's all right now. I've told it to go away. So, I told that story about the central heating to a group of practitioners a few weeks ago, and one of them helpfully said, in the olden days, before people had central heating, and I thought, oh, now I belong to the olden days. It's really, really nice to know that. Where did I put my clicker? There it is. Those are only... there, now we should go back to that. Those are only theories. The things I've mentioned are not proven. I'll talk a bit about time on screens in a minute, but even that's not as clear as you might think it would be. There is one pure piece of proof that is very well researched, and that is that the amount of time that the TV is on in the background in children's homes, in the background, not watching it, but just on in the background, does predict school readiness and language skills at age 4. And this is because young children have single channel attention, and if the TV's on, they can't really tune into the adult voices from which they need to learn. And I'm reminded here of a speech and language therapist in Essex who once told me she visited a home where there was not just one TV on all the time, but two. On the bottom, there was a TV with children's programs on it, and on top, there was one with adult programs on it. But that sounds a bit as if I'm blaming her. But you know, that parent, like many, many other parents, believed that children learn language from TV. And they can from Sesame Street and a few programs. So, you know, it's possible. But having it on as the background, she didn't know that that was not a good thing to do. And also, if you're a bit lonely and you're living in a council estate and you're depressed and you're a single parent, you're going to have the TV on in the daytime, aren't you? Because it cheers you up a bit. So there's no point condemning people. It's about letting them know what the facts are. We come now to those screens. Fascinating recent study in this country that found, surprisingly, no relationship between the amount of time preschool children were spending on screens and their language development, as long as their parents were sharing books with them. The one factor that made more difference than anything, and certainly more difference than time on screens, was sharing books with children. Now, that was a middle-class sample, so we don't know if it would be true for everybody, but it is interesting to make us think that it's how you use a screen, not the actual thing that matters, isn't it? And many families do use them to... My daughter conjures up a wonder, if her 3-year-old's interested in something, she conjures up a YouTube clip of rabbits giving birth or whatever it is, something, you know, for the moment. And it's a wonderful use of screens to aid their communication and language. So that was about the context, if you like, the closing the gap and the fact that the gap seems to be growing. Let's now move to the fascinating facts. And the first fascinating fact is an experiment where they again had researchers sitting in people's living rooms, preschool children counting something. But what they counted was not the number of words, but the number of conversations. And they called a conversational turn was defined as when adult said something, child said something back, or child said something, adult said something back. So it was a turn, and they counted those. They actually didn't do it by sitting in living rooms. They did it with a recorder, a special recorder. And then they took the children into the laboratory and they wired up their brains to record brain activity. And they found that those thank you very much, that where children had more of the conversational turns at home, the part of their brain that deals with language lit up more strongly when they heard stories read to them in the laboratory than those children who hadn't had so many conversations. So there was something about the number of conversations at home that was activating, supporting brain development in a particular part of the brain. They also found, fascinatingly, for every 11 extra turns, conversational turns, there was a 1-point increase in children's language scores. And what we learned from this is that we can move on just from the idea of the number of words children hear. That's important, but more important is the number of conversations that they have with a responsive adult. This applies too, not just in the home, but in the setting. And I think this is really interesting because sometimes there can be a philosophy of early education that says, you know, when they're 4, we should sit them down and they should sit still and listen. But what this shows is that the best way of facilitating language development in the setting, at least for children, these children were 2 to 3 years old, was the conversations, not talking at them, but having conversations. And conversations can be difficult to build in busy earlier settings. And they can't appear in your planning. I don't know how you plan here, but in England they have a fetish for planning. And if you can't put it in your planning, it's not important, you don't do it. So many people say to me, it's really hard to make time for those conversations. And what I'm going to ask you to do now is reflect with someone near you about this issue. How do you create time for those conversations, particularly in group setting? If you're doing one-to-one care, the conversations will happen naturally. But if you're in a group setting particularly, how do you do it? Just talk about how you make time for those unplanned two-way conversations. Okay, could you bring your sentence to a close, please? Thank you. And what I want to say to you is that having a sustained conversation with a child is probably the best thing you can do all day. And sometimes we rush around making all singing, dancing displays and wonderful activities, and we focus on the activities. There's nothing better than sitting next to a child, watching what they choose to do and chatting to them about it. And that is, never think you're wasting your time. It is the best thing, the most powerful thing you can possibly do. A few ways now that we might promote conversations in the home, simple ways that we can do that. And one of them is to use Ask Me About stickers. Now, an Ask Me About sticker, if you don't know about it, is children go home with a little sticker on saying maybe, today we did floating and sinking. Ask me about it, or whatever you've done. And then, when the child gets home, it's an invitation to a conversation, isn't it? I see a lot of my 3 grandchildren, certainly with the older ones. If I ask them anything about what they did at school, all I get is we had sausages for lunch. You know what it's like. So try that. For those of you who are in schools, you can even get your not the older teachers, but the teachers of older children to do it too, because 10-year-olds can make their own Ask Me About stickers at the end of a lesson to say, today I learned about whatever in history, and then ask me about it. Really simple and fun. Another lovely idea, I'm just going to do snippets of ideas, because what I'm trying to do is take a piece of research and then interpret that into practice, not with lots of examples, but a few. And this is a chatterboxes I saw in one project in a early years setting, where they made loanable boxes that families could take home to do things with their children, and the boxes were themed. So they might be nursery rhyme boxes. This you can see is a nursery rhyme box. They might be birthday boxes or seaside boxes, and they're full of stuff that makes parents want to do things with their child. And one of the things I learned when I was communication champion, it is no use, that's rustling, but it's no use saying to parents, talk to your child, they will say, well, what about? It needs to be scaffolded. And this, you know, if I was that lonely mum on a council estate and I got a biscuit recipe and a star cutter, I'd do that. And then I would have a conversation with my child. Another one, I saw a Jack and Jill one, another nursery rhyme. And what did they put in there? They had the rhyme and then a bucket, some brown paper, a little plastic bottle of vinegar and some plasters. So a lovely way of getting children to reenact the rhymes and talk about the activities. This is a primary school where in the playground they've got a huge banner on the wall and it says, talking children, talk with your child. And if you can see, there's a red arrow pointing to a speech bubble, a square speech bubble. They change that speech bubble every week so that it has a different topic of conversation. So one week it might be, if you were an animal, what would you choose to be? And the idea is that the families then talk about that, have conversations at home about that topic. The families absolutely love it. The parents rush in and say, whoa, what are we talking about this week? Fascinating fact number 2 about brain building. And this one is about mind reading. Researchers have found that a very good predictor of children's language at age 2 and their later school success is whether parents are able to kind of read their babies' minds to guess and comment on what they might be thinking or feeling. So they comment on what the baby likes or says, you like that, don't you? Oh, you hate broccoli, I can see that. They comment on what the child remembers. They comment on what the child finds funny. You like that? Yeah, that's making you laugh, isn't it? So, but they're trying to guess what's in the child's mind and then do a running commentary on it. And that was found to be a really good technique. The key is, for older children, following the child's lead, as I said, with a conversation, watching what they're doing and then talking about it, talking about what they're looking at or doing or feeling. It is like a commentary. You keep up a commentary, and I expect you do that already in the setting. But one of the fascinating facts about research is that for children who were 18 months old, that commenting by the adult had to be really quick. It had to be within 2 seconds. So the adult had to notice what the child was interested in, looking at, pointing at, doing, and say something about it within 2 seconds. And if they did that kind of quick, it's called contingency, that quick contingent responding, then children would have bigger vocabularies later on. And why did it have to be so quick? Again, it's to do with children's how long they can attend to things. And with children at 9 months or 1 year or 12 months, if you're not quick, their attention will have gone on to something else. You have to capture the moment and capture that instant of interest. With older children, you can wait longer. I don't think it's 2 seconds. Nobody's established it, but still follow the same principle of commenting on what they're doing. And I do mean commenting. As adults, when we're talking with children, we ask them lots of questions. We ask them lots of questions like this. We might come to a picture of a tiger in the book and say, what's this? What colour is it? What noise does it make? Where does it live? That's a very typical adult kind of behaviour, and parents do it too. But it has always puzzled me why as adults we spend so long asking children questions to which we already know the answer. You know, it's an odd thing that, isn't it? But anyway, research shows that we shouldn't be doing that it is not helpful to ask these questions that just have a short answer. If you ask a child, what's that? Tiger. That's all you'll get. If you say, what colour is it? Stripy. You won't get a conversation, you'll just get single words. But the way to get a conversation is not to ask questions, but to comment. So you simply say, oh, I hope he's not hungry. Or, I wonder what he's looking at. Or, wonder what he likes to eat. I'd love to stroke him, but I'd be a bit scared. And then you shut up. You, the adult, comment, and then you wait. It's a bit like the difference between asking a child, what's your favourite ice cream? All you'll get back from that is vanilla or whatever. Or commenting, which would be, you know, you as the adult would say, you know, my favourite ice cream is that one at Ben and Jerry's that's got honeycomb in it. I absolutely love that. And then you shut up. That will elicit much more from the child than that single question of what's your favourite ice cream. Now, it's quite hard to change what we do about this. We're quite used to, say, looking at a book with a child and asking those closed questions, but it is worth practising. So have a go now. Imagine you were sharing a book with a child and you came to this picture. Could you talk to someone near you and come up with a comment you would make that is not a question, but a comment you could make about those elephants that might, something you wonder. What does it make you wonder? Something you really think about. Come up with a comment and I'll ask you. Okay. Thank you. Any offers? What might you wonder or say about that? I wonder what they're doing. Wonder if they like each other. Wonder if they like each other a lot. Or not. Yeah, but something that you genuinely are thinking about or wonder. However, I did this with a group of teachers and one of them came up with this. I wonder what colour they are. Now, can you see what's wrong with this? You can't just stick I wonder onto the front of it. It's a bit more. This is from an earlier setting where they tried to remind themselves to use comments rather than questions by putting up some prompts for whoever was in the setting and for parents and everybody to use these sorts of comments rather than ask those direct questions. As I said, you might have to do that to remind yourself to comment, not question. And the second aspect of commenting is a really simple technique that I'm sure you use already. Best ever way of building vocabulary is to comment, say back what the child has said and add a word. So the child says, big bird, and you add to that, you expand it. You say, yes, it's a big noisy bird called a magpie. So you've added the word noisy to the child's vocabulary and magpie. And you can do that any time in the setting. Just bounce back what they've said and add a word or more words. Fascinating fact number 3. Sharing books. Now, sharing books has been called the rocket fuel of language development. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that. Why is it so important for language development? In sharing books, adults, whether it's parents or practitioners, are using words that they might not use in everyday conversation. Books take you to a different level of language. They expose the child to more rare words and different sentence structures. Book language is different from conversation. So it lifts that child to a different level of language. It also, of course, has huge social emotional effects, the whole aspect of sharing a book. And it promotes having a chat about a book, sharing a book and talking about it, promotes that aspect of what I called contingency, where you're very quick to respond to what the child's interested in because you're both looking at the same book. So you can get, the child looks at the elephants and says, oh, they look scary, and you're contingent. You respond to that straight away because you're both looking at the same thing at the same time. These are some amazing facts that we need to share with our families. Even young children. Now, this study found that even age 8 months sharing books with a child will have a profound effect on spoken vocabulary. 4 months didn't, age 4 months, but from 8 months onward. Even many parents aren't aware that they can share books with 8-month-olds. Many of them not aware that they can talk to a child who doesn't talk back. But that's one of the findings of science. And this I find absolutely amazing, and we should tell every parent this. If you read to your 4-year-old every day, instead of less often, it will have the effect of almost adding a year to their reading skills when they're 8 or 9. Adding a whole year to their reading ability on the basis of reading to them every day rather than less often when they're 4 or 5. As we saw earlier, it was more important than the amount of screen time whether parents were sharing books. And the greatest effect on language development comes from not reading a book cover to cover to the child, but talking about the book, having a conversation about the book. Now, that doesn't mean you should never read a book. Children do want the whole story, and very often the first read, you'll want to read it straight through. But after that, the most effect on language comes from looking at bits of the pages and chatting about them. And not all families know this. You know it, but they may not, because I remember one mum who said to me not long ago, she was a very devoted mum, really committed, and she wanted her child to be ready for school, and she said, I do read to him, I read to him lots, but he keeps on interrupting. Nobody had told her that the interrupting is really a very good thing, and that's what we want the child to do. And the second finding, this was some research I read very, very recently, about dramatic pauses. Researchers found that they were trying to teach some made-up monster words to children in this experiment, names of monsters. And in one condition, they paused in a picture book before they came to the monster name with one of those dramatic pauses. And in another condition, they paused after the monster word. And in another condition, they didn't pause at all. But when you use the dramatic pause before this new vocabulary, children remembered it more. So anticipate the new words the children might not know and give that dramatic pause.
Some kids are always coming back to the same story.
I have this for you next. This is another fascinating fact that you have anticipated. It's amazing. We'll come to it. Possibly now, I'm not entirely sure. However, we're not doing that well on shared reading. There does seem to be a drop in home reading anyway. And this is a bit sad. A recent survey showed that 26% of parents are using Alexa or Siri to read the bedtime story. 26%. I will get to it. Okay, now, I really am not saying that you should never use Alexa or Siri to read a child a story. And for some parents you work with who are not literate themselves, it is very useful for children to hear stories read, especially, I think, through the many YouTube is full of films of authors reading their own picture books to children. And if a parent can't read themselves, best thing is to steer them to those YouTube films and ask them to sit next to their child and cuddle up and watch it together. Then they don't have to read it. So digital stories have a place, but they can't replace the cuddle, can they? They can't replace the emotional quality of it. Fascinating facts 4 and 5. This one is amazing. Vocabulary is better recalled after a nap or a nighttime sleep. This is because while we're asleep, memory works like this. Our brains consolidate new things we've learned. So while we sleep, that child's brain is processing the new words, and they'll remember them better if they hear them just before a nap. So do you know the whole idea of a bedtime story seems to be children's brains making them tell us what they need. Children's brains know they need books before bedtime, and that's why we have this tradition of the bedtime story. And here's the answer to your really perceptive question. Children ask for the same book again and again, don't they? And it drives us mad. I don't know whether you've ever seen this. It's a wonderful picture book by Emily Gravett. It's called Again. It's about a little dragon who asks for the same book again and again and gets really cross when it's maddening. But it's another case of children's brains knowing what they need, because research has shown that children will remember vocabulary better if they hear a new word repeated again and again by hearing it in the same story, read multiple times, than if they hear that new word in 5 different books. So there is a reason for children wanting that repetition. It's how they recall vocabulary. So we have to go along with it. And there are implications there for how we structure our resources. You know, have we got lots of opportunity in the setting for children to have a look again at familiar books to reread? Are we sending home books that children have already shared for another opportunity? Are we telling parents that that's a good thing to do, that they have the same book again, and why that is? So a bit of reflection again on with your colleagues around you. How are you making opportunities in your setting for children to share books with adults as often as possible? How do you adjust your day? How do you make it happen? What are you doing if you're in a school? What are you doing in a setting to try to get as many books as possible into children in the course of a day? What do you do to make that happen? Okay, could we come together again, please? Thank you. Thank you. Anybody willing to share anything they're doing to make this a priority? Is it difficult to find time yet? Oh, I follow your feet and worship you. It's very hard in a big group like this.
So it's not necessarily something that we're doing, but I know schools that do 5 a day.
Yes.
So schools do it in lots of different ways. So you can either gather your group of children who may not do and have enough opportunities at home to hear those stories and read those stories to them, or some schools will shake a shaper and they'll say it's story time and give the opportunities, for children to come over, and then we'll have a shelf with 5 a day books on.
Lovely, lovely. I met one school, that's really lovely. I'd heard about 5 a day, but not quite know that it was happening in so many settings. That's great. One school I met, they have a time in the day they dedicate to story time, and they distribute staff all around the school with books. And in term 1, the children then choose where to go to, and they'll go to an adult and they'll spread themselves out and have a book. In term 2, they have older children go down and share books with younger children. And then in term 3, they have within the class, they have children of the same age reading to each other, which would be difficult in early years. Yeah.
Has a lovely project, I don't know if you're aware of it, called Hidden on the Rock.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
this is a book in
Yeah.
a plastic bag with a little thing about reading to children.
Yeah.
And they are literally hidden anywhere. You might find them in your garden, or you might
Really?
yes.
Who runs it then? Fantastic, hidden on the rock. So do you go out personally hiding these? That's just amazing. It must be so exciting for the families. Wonderful. So we've had 5 a day. Volunteer programs is quite useful, because if you have any form of volunteering in your setting, one of the best things is to ask the volunteer to share books with children who don't get books shared with them at home. I also know some settings where they pair up with a care home for older people near them, and they engage the older people in sharing books with the under 5s. And bedtime. Oh no, there's one thing I want to go on from that, is the really good tip from a very good earlier speaker called Penny Tassoni, so I got it from her. And she talks about, and I think she's quite right, how some children managed in their whole day in the setting to escape. And they don't settle to share a book with anybody or to have a conversation with an adult. So what she suggests, very simple, you get a flip chart or a piece of paper on the wall, you write down the names of the children that you're a bit worried about their language, who need some targeted help. And so you might have 5 names. Next to them, you put columns. Every time an adult in the setting shares a book with that child, they put a tick in one column next to their name. If they get a second book, they get a tick in the second column. They also do it for conversations, so that every time an adult's on a different flip chart, every time an adult has had a 5-minute conversation with that target child, they'll put a tick. If they manage a 10-minute conversation, wow, wouldn't that be wonderful? They put 2 ticks. And then they can monitor over the day which are the children who are managing to escape, and they can home in on them and attempt to pin them down to conversation and books. And the last thing I want to touch on is bedtime stories and events, projects that get families reading to children. And this was one in a children's centre in England where they challenged their dads to read to their children. They put up a huge poster and they sent home leaflets saying, "Did you know that 80% of fathers these days say they do not have time for bedtime stories? Can't be true here, can it?" So they challenged their dads to prove it wasn't true. And they sent home a book bag with a lovely book to read in it and a disposable camera, so that someone in the home could take a picture of dad reading to child. And they then plastered their pictures all over the setting, and it was a really good celebration event. And the dads said that they really enjoyed knowing that they were important. Fascinating fact that I haven't got my slides because I can't source it. I read it once and I can't find the blasted reference, but it's some researcher found that the best predictor of whether a boy will grow up delinquent is whether his father reads to him at the age of 6. So it really, really matters. And then, of course, you have the wonderful Real project, the programme that is happening here in Jersey and in many places across the world, which is one of the best evidence ways of engaging parents in the importance of sharing books with children. This one you might not be so aware of is a programme called Fred. This is targeted at fathers again. It hasn't had a lot of evaluation, but it's just a 4-week programme that tries to get fathers reading every day to their children, and they're using it in England, in Blackpool, and one of the other Better Start, a big lottery funded project. They're trying Fred out there to see if they can engage their fathers more. Fascinating facts number 6 and 7. Now these are about the environment that we provide for children. Those enabling and supportive environments that the Early Years Foundation stage is all about. This, I think, you'll love. It's a small-scale study in Manchester, but they looked at the kind of talk that parents had with children outside in a park and inside in a really good educational, in a hall with lots of things to do, lots of activities, so very stimulating. And they found that there was better communication between the child and the adult, more of that contingency, more responsive, more linking to what the child was interested in the outdoors than in the indoors. This too I found fascinating. Pretend play seems to provide one of the best contexts for developing language. When you get down in there and engage with children in their pretend play. That was with 3 and 4-year-olds. I'd like to show you now a few enabling environments that I've seen on my travels. This was a rather bleak, it was a playground at a school where there wasn't much conversation going on. The environment wasn't very supportive of talk. So what they did was get the caretaker to build a little structure with benches and wood overhead, and then they dress that up. This is Diwali, but they dress it up with different props over the year. And they found that having done that, that created an environment where children would now sit and have conversations instead of just rushing round and round, knocking each other over. In the same school, they built a small sensory garden. It looks big. It's actually not much bigger than this table and this group of lovely people here. And they built a sensory garden because we know that we talk more. We have more conversations when we're exposed to a strong sensory stimulus. If I were to put a big bowl of wobbling red jelly in the middle of this room now, you would talk. You wouldn't be able to stop yourself. There's something grabby about it. So they built a sensory garden with soft furry leaves for children to stroke. Uh-oh, it's doing it again. There are 13 messages waiting to be read. I don't care, you know. I really don't care. Leaves to stroke and smells, scented plants and beautiful coloured plants and wind chimes for sound. Between the sensory area of this outdoor area and the rest of the area, they built a small wooden bridge. It's just a little thing. Now, all of you who work with young children know that wherever there is a bridge, there will always be a child guarding the bridge, will there not? And if you're guarding the bridge, then you have a conversation with whoever is coming over it. You created a place that becomes suddenly language rich, just by a little nudge to the environment. This is another example of the environment. This was an outdoor setting where there wasn't much talk, much conversation going on, because children were largely going round and round in wheeled vehicles, various kinds of bikes, not much talk. So what they did was, with the children, build a pretend petrol pump out of cardboard boxes and some old washing machine tubing. And having built the petrol pump, then of course the children on the bikes would stop to have someone fill up their petrol tank and have a conversation. They'd created a place where those conversations would happen. Role play areas, of course, are the classic ways of getting children talking more in our knowledge about pretend play. And this was just one lovely baby clinic I saw. There are the children making the appointments for the babies to be weighed and immunised. And you'll notice they've got telephones in their hand. And if you give a toy telephone to a child, it's really creating talk, and it's creating a kind of more complex talk. On the telephone, we can't just use basic conversation. We have to lift our game to what's called decontextualised talk. And then in the outdoor area, the boys decided that if the babies were going to come and be immunised and weighed, they would need to be washed. So the boys got together and had to plan. They had to use talk to plan how are we going to wash the babies, what will we wash them in, and how are we going to get the water into the tub. So your environment is fundamentally incredibly important for your children's development. And three things I've learned about role plays that seem to me all important is, first, get the children to help plan them. I've never forgotten an earlier setting I went to once where the children wanted a space station, and they were using little cut-out bits of squared paper to design it. They designed it. They said, we need this, we need that. Will you please go and get us this? So they helped to create it. And the second key thing is to get down in there and model the kind of language you want children to use, to actually model the language you want. And the third is to have that vocabulary around. If children are old, put it up near the role play area. If the children are 4 and 5, they may then read it and use it themselves. If they're younger, it encourages the adults who are around them to remember. That's the key vocabulary that we want children to be using to model it so that they will use it too. Next one, not really surprising, but it was good to see it in print, that children don't just learn from adults, they do learn from listening and talking with each other. And I think this is quite important when we think of pupil groupings. If we are in schools where children begin, in reception, to be sat in groups sometimes, it's important to make sure that they're not all groups of children with limited language, and that you do have those good role models, so the children need opportunities to talk to their peers, and a good mixture. Having older children come and talk with them in the setting is really, really good. Fascinating fact number 9, I've got 10 altogether. And this is interesting because it shows that language isn't just a sort of cognitive function, it's also about feelings, and children learn language better when they feel well supported emotionally by the adults around them. So everything you do as key workers, as adults, to build those warm, supportive relationships, that's the cauldron in which language is forged and grows. However, it's not enough on its own. What this research showed, that if you're warm and loving and you do all the love in the world, but the quality of pedagogy and what you're actually offering children is not great, then all the warm love in the world won't improve their language. They need the skills, the skilled pedagogy, the skilled practitioners, and the warmth and love. And the last one, I've got 10 fascinating facts altogether. This is about the difference you can make by doing more focused work with children. So a lot of what I've talked about so far has been about child-initiated learning, where you are following the child's need and commenting and expanding on what they say and so on. But there is a fair bit of research that shows that as well as that, some children who need that bit of extra help, like your groups, actually pinning them down to some adult-led, time-limited, focused work may be really effective. And these are just 2 examples, and I'll come to welcome later, but 2 examples of programs that an adult in the setting delivers to a small group of children. So the first one, Nellie, that's when it was originally evaluated, it was 10 weeks of group sessions in the nursery, followed by 20 weeks in reception, and it had a really big impact. It's sort of scripted, there's a book, the adults get training, whoever's doing it, get training to do it, and it did have an impact on children's reading comprehension, and that's now available for just reception. It's a 20-week reception program for a focus group of children. This is another example. The children's charity ICANN have a series of programs called Talk Boost, and this is Early Talk Boost, which is for nursery, and they also have older ones. And what I want to get across is the kind of quick effect you can get with these, the catch-up you can get if the right children are targeted. These are not for children who have significant long-term complex needs that need a speech and language therapist. They're for children who haven't had the opportunity, who haven't had much conversation at home, or they're also very effective for children learning English as an additional language as a quick catch-up. But they do catch children up quite quickly. The ICANN's Talk Boost for 5 and 6-year-olds, 83% of children in that, I think it's an 8-week program, 83% of children got back to expected levels in vocabulary, which is quite remarkable if you target the right children. But you don't have to use one of these sort of scripted programs. Welcome is another approach, more individualised, because you assess, as you heard, you assess children, and then you can put together groups on the basis of your assessment, or you can do individual programs, but you get your book ideas from the big book of ideas. It's not all written out for you as a script. But my daughter used Welcome. She taught reception in a really the most challenging class I've ever heard of 5-year-olds, and she used Welcome very thoroughly with her teaching assistant, and she got every one of those children to a good level of development by the end of the year. So I've seen it in practice, how effective it is. So we move on now to supporting parents. How can we, in our roles, in whatever setting we work in, or as nannies or as childminders, how can we reach out to get messages to parents about the importance of talking to their child, the importance of conversations, the importance of contingency, the importance of mind reading? All that research is relevant to both you as practitioners and to parents, and parents don't know about it. So I'll talk first about a campaign that is being developed by the English government, and it's called Hungry Little Minds. Now, the English government, the Department for Education, have gone to a lot of trouble about this campaign. They used the big advertising agency Saatchi & Saatchi. They did lots of focus groups, lots of market research to find what are the right messages that don't sort of talk down to parents and make them feel they're being lectured. What really gets them going? What fires them up? And it was interesting that they found that what parents responded to was the idea of this brain building idea that what they do is feeding hungry little minds. They like this idea that they were important in lighting up hungry little minds. What they liked too was the idea that it didn't have to be too time consuming, that they were busy, these families that were interviewed. They wanted a message that they could do this just within their everyday activities, that they didn't have to do something special, that they could build this into bath time, bedtime, in the supermarket, whatever. They liked the messages that children love it. They want, more than anything, parents want happy children. So they love messages about happiness. They didn't like messages about getting your child ready to read. They weren't looking at long-term academic success, but they did like the idea of setting their child up ready for school, setting them up ready, by which they meant as much socially setting them up as setting them up academically. They wanted to know that they'd be doing the right thing so that when the child started school, they'd be able to make friends and get on with other people and socialise. So the DFE then developed a website called Hungry Little Minds and a whole lot of social media activity that happened over last summer. Because all of us who work in this field, I spent a long time looking at wonderful speech and language therapy services giving leaflets to parents about early language development. And I thought, actually that's had its day. People don't get their information anymore from leaflets. They get it in bites from social media. So to me, I've always felt that the best campaigns to reach out to parents will be the ideal. We haven't yet reached nirvana, but the ideal would be your baby's born, you've got your mobile phone. Every week you get a wonderful little film clip or a tip on your mobile according to your child's age to say, try this or do that. Via the Best Beginnings app exists, but Easy Peasy exists. Easy Peasy exists, it does. And I know Easy Peasy well and I support it. Its focus has not totally been language development. It's self-regulation and more thing, but it does exist and it is a wonderful program. And I do think that we have to use that technology rather than the written word. So Hungry Little Minds went out on social media, but it also, they put messages, key messages and pictures, all through pictures like this, into some magazines, carefully targeted magazines. They looked at what families read, and it was magazines like Heat and Closer and What's on TV. So they were targeting particular groups of families and they wanted to reach them. And they said also that they can't do this alone. There's always a risk with government messages. People don't like being told what to do by government. So they want it to be more than a government campaign. And I've told them, it's just if people see this as a government campaign, they won't like it. Whereas the stuff about feeding your child properly, that never looked like government. It always, and it went down quite well. So you've got to be quite clever about this. So they want Hungry Little Minds to be supported by other people, by businesses. They're engaging a whole lot of businesses in Hungry Little Minds. And some of the businesses are doing amazing things. So Clark's shoe shops are training all their staff in how to give messages to families about chatting, playing and reading with children. There is a train company. Now, trains are not relevant on Jersey, I'm told. No, but anyway, you do know what trains are. And there's a train company in the north of England called Arriva, who are a partner in this business enterprise. And what Arriva train company have done is sometimes trains, you will have been on them, have quiet carriages where nobody's supposed to have their mobiles on and things. Well, what Arriva have done is at school half terms, they have noisy carriages where they want families to be noisy and to talk to each other. So business has been very imaginative in their contribution. And then government want earlier settings to contribute to the effort as well, and charities, voluntary and community groups, and I'll talk about the media later. So the government have produced in England resources with posters and leaflets that anybody, not just in England, can download from that website. And I know you've got a copy of my slides. Are they going to be sent out afterwards as well, electronically, or? Yeah, because what I'm going to show you lots of links, and instead of you trying to write them down, you'll be able to access them from my slides. But here are some examples of the posters and leaflets that you can customise for your families. So this one, if you can't see it, this is meant to convey play. imaginative pretend play. We're building a spaceship with a window and an astronaut. What's an astronaut? And this one, shared book reading, prediction. Is there still a tiger under the flap? Is there still a tiger? Yes, tiger's still there. So they're all they're framed in the child's voice. The child is speaking these, which went down well with parents. And this is my favourite. I hardly understood a word, but I'm so glad we had this chat. Which is lovely. And that is a really important message about talking with children before they can talk back. I once met a mum who said to me of her toddler, "He don't talk to me, so I don't talk to him." And that again sounds as if I'm judging her, and I'm not, but she simply did not know that you could talk to a child before they talk back, and she felt silly doing it. And we have to respect and honour that, and we have to give that message of, look, this child may not have understood, but they love that responsiveness. They love to have a conversation with you even before they're talking themselves. So the English government are not the only one who are interested in campaigns with parents and resources for parents. Other people are as well. The NSPCC has set up a system where parents can subscribe and get sent one of those, a weekly, probably not weekly, but a monthly tip, maybe a bit of film. That's for children under 2. The Big Little Moments, the one at the bottom, is this big lottery-funded project in England called A Better Start, and they have developed animations on a website to get across key messages. Serve and Return is the Harvard website that Kathy mentioned. Serve and Return being the metaphor for this kind of conversation between adult and child. And the one at the top, Tiny Happy People, is the BBC's campaign, and they are developing lots and lots of films and so on. So I'm going to show you a few of those films, but before I do, I'd like you just to have a chat and say, now, of all those, which do you think most grab you as a slogan? Is it Tiny Happy People? Is it Big Little Moments? Is it Hungry Little Minds? What do you think about them? Which is most grabby for you and why? So have a conversation about that. Could I interrupt that one again? So what did you think? What grabs you? The best advertising minds have gone into these slogans. Which did you like? Tiny Happy People. I think that's very clever. That's very BBC-ish, isn't it? It's very lovely. I like that one, yeah. Hungry Little Minds, not quite so sure about. Any others you liked? Big Little Moments I quite like, because what they mean by Big Little Moments is that any time of day, just a few seconds in your daily routine works. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but every moment of play, chat, interaction with your child is a big one. So let's look at some films. This is from Hungry Little Minds. Hungry Little Minds, the website is organised by age bands, so parents can go on and look at their child's age. And this is a film. Each age band, it has tips, top tips, and it has a little film. And this is a film of a child, I think it was 6 weeks. I should know, because this film is actually a friend of mine sent it to me. Her son had had a baby. She's a shared granny like me, and she sent me this amazing film. And I said, right, I think the DFE would like to use this. And she said yes. So this is Simon and Sebastian, who have now become poster boys. This is Big Little Moments, the lottery funded one. And this is an animation about, a very short one about sharing a story.
Big Little Moments, number 1. Sharing a story. Young brains need building, just like houses. Sharing stories, what's that? Is really important for helping young brains grow and learn. These little moments help your child in a big way. For more moments, visit abetterstartsouthend.co.uk/Big Little Moments.
So you get the message there. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Every moment can be an important one. And there's others. There's sharing a story, using loving words, making everyday moments fun, talking to your bump in pregnancy, and so on. Saying what they see and saying what they're doing. So it's about commenting. It's very adult, friendly, parent-friendly language. Next one. This is a National Literacy Trust film, and it's a bit longer, this one, and this is about how to share a book with a child.
Oh dear, what's the matter? Oh dear, put your hand over your mouth like this. What's that?
Cheese.
What are they?
Cheese.
Cheese?
Yes.
Not cheese. Those are potatoes.
No, not cheese.
That's not cheese. That's onions and potatoes. You're just teasing me. What are they?
Nana.
No, you're just joking with me.
Nana.
They're not. You're teasing me. You know they're not. What are they?
Aki.
What?
You mean?
You're deliberately doing this. Deliberately joking with me.
Tommy. Naughty.
He's a naughty teddy bear, is he? Let's have a look, see what's on the next page.
No, red.
Alright.
Red.
Alright, you turn it.
Red. Okay. Oh, it's red.
That's nice bread. Do you want a piece? You have a bit. Oh, don't bite my finger.
Then.
I don't like that bread. I like that bread, but you need to cut it. Will you get me a piece of bread and cut it for me with a knife? Now give me it in my mouth, please. Yes, please, some more. Will you put some jam on as well? Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you. More! I'm full now. I'm full of bread. Oh, you got it on my nose. You'll have to wipe my face, wash my face, because you've got jam all over my face. Will you wash my face for me, please? Oh, you're doing it deliberately now.
Money.
Honey?
All left.
All left. Let's see what's on the next page, because he hasn't got very much in his trolley. He's still got an empty trolley. You put the bread in the trolley, you put it in. Okay.
Oh, up.
So what have we got there?
Up. Needy.
Take it up.
Needy.
To read it.
Needy.
What's that?
Eating.
Pardon?
Eating.
Eating.
No. Eating.
Beans. No, tins. I don't know what you're saying.
Hey, Mummy. No, Mummy.
What is it?
Apple.
Apple. Okay, you go look for an apple.
Apple there.
Yeah, what else?
I do this.
Orange juice. Well, oranges.
Rabbit.
Flowers. Smell the flowers. Let me smell the flowers. Get a flower. Pick a flower for me. Pick one for me and let me smell it, please. Oh, it's lovely, isn't it?
Yes.
Lovely.
And egg.
What are they?
Egg. Mommy, egg.
Eggs. They're a bit like eggs, but they're actually plums.
Rough.
They're the same shape. It's hard to tell. What about these? Do you know what these are?
Sheesh.
They're called lemons.
Rabbit.
They're a bit bitter.
Flower.
Very nice flowers, aren't they? Lovely.
Yes.
Should we buy some flowers for Mummy?
Yes.
Okay.
So you notice the dad wasn't asking, what's that? How many are there? Count them. Is it blue? They were having a conversation and doing lots of pretend play as well. Let's get rid of that one. That one. And now go back to slideshow. The next set of slides are just the links so that you've got them, so that you can use any of them that you want. That's one I haven't mentioned. That's developed by a speech and language therapy service, and they're animations, very nice short animations aimed at parents of preschool children. That's the NSPC. There's only one problem with the NSPCC one. The link, it says preventing abuse, and that is the way into this. And I think if you're a parent, you would not want to go into a website that had preventing abuse, when all it is about how to interact and play with your child. So I would suggest you find a different way in, steering parents, get them to sign up without seeing that link. That's the Better Start Big Little Moments. And there's the book sharing film you just saw is the second one there. The first one, there is a parent chatting about what she's cooking. So she's carrying her child and talking about what she's going to cook for dinner. These are useful sites for parents, not films specifically, but lots of tips. The ICANN's Talking Point is a great website for any parent who's not sure whether their child's language is age appropriate or not. That they can go in there and see, should I be worried? Should I refer to a speech and language therapist? And there's lots of information about how to promote language. And the National Literacy Trust Small Talk is a growing website full of tips, resources, things to do in the holidays, fun stuff to promote language. What I would emphasise, though, is that all of these messages are best if they are embedded in some kind of shared messages. Where I've seen best practices where earlier settings, health visitors, speech and language therapy services, youth services, everyone is giving a consistent set of messages to parents, and where they've actually worked on those together. And I don't know whether that's something you could do here in Jersey, but it seems to be necessary so that everybody who has contact with young families is saying things like this. Now, you're the best toy in the box. That comes from Stoke-on-Trent, where they had a big campaign called Stoke Speaks Out. And I love that one because it's saying to parents, never mind the all-singing, dancing, electronic fire engine you're going to buy for Christmas. You, the adult, are the best toy in the box for your child. Your time playing with them is better than anything else you can spend. FaceTime your baby. I worked with a group who came up with that one, and I thought that was quite clever of them to come up with that. The turn off the TV and talk to me. Positive messages are often best. I like dummies hide smiles. You know, dummies are not great for language development. I like dummies hide smiles better than the dummy, which is another one often. So a positive message really, really works. And the other one that should be in everybody's messages is keep your first language alive. If you have two languages, talk to your child at home in the language you are most comfortable with. That's absolutely essential. We all give that message. So I want to stop there now, and we have, I think, till 20 past. So we have time for discussion. It might not just be questions, it might be discussion. So what I'd like you to do is just have a chat on your table about, is there anything you'd like to raise, ask, discuss, or just chat about those films and how you might see yourself using them? Perhaps, is there a way you could use them with your families? Could I interrupt your conversation one last time? Well, I do hate interrupting conversations. Thank you so much. So, is there anything anybody, I hope, and so, no, I shouldn't say is there anything. What would you like to say? And it doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment, or it can be, what's that stupid woman on about? She's no idea what it's like for me in my workplace. Anything you want to raise, ask, discuss, this is time. Oh, wonderful, I fall at your feet also.
Right at the beginning, about the fact that if you've got a TV on and the impact that has on children under 2 developing their language learning, is there any references at all about if people have got music playing or the radio on? Is there anything linked to that at all?
I have heard, and I don't know a reference, but I've heard that, for example, keeping jolly nursery rhymes playing in the background in an earlier setting is not a good idea because of the same factor that the child can't attend to 2 sources of information at once, and therefore you want to minimise the background noise. And there is a whole lot of research about acoustic environments, which I haven't had time to talk about. There's lots of that in my book, but noisy environments are not good for learning language. And anything you can, by their nature, many settings are noisy, but anything you can do to minimise it with soft cushions, absorbing anything that will absorb it, anything you do just to get fixed the noisy things, like you might have a heater that's making a constant noise. It is really worth attending to those acoustics as far as you can. Not stopping children talking, but stopping all the other rubbish that might be happening. Another brave person.
Just a term that I've heard this week, which I haven't really thought about before, when you were talking about English as an additional language. I've heard someone talking about emergent bilingualism. So rather than looking at it as an additional language, you're actually an emergent bilingual. And I just thought, what a wonderfully positive way of describing that.
It is,
that
it is.
Experience.
And just, I wish I was bilingual. I'm not, we just got to convey that. Being bilingual is such a wonderful thing. And there is some research, it's a bit debated, but there is some research that suggests that if you are bilingual, you have better executive function in your brain, you're more able to use that, focus your attention and control the rest of your brain, whether it's, it is disputed. But yeah, bilingualism is a great asset. And it does sadly happen. There was a time, and I think there's still a time in England where GPs, for example, where people, health visitors I think have learned not to, but where GPs would be telling parents, oh, you must talk to him in English. And I had a whole lot of trouble with the English government, who, they asked me for all the references on this so they could tell ministers that really the science says that you should not tell parents to use English at home if it's not their most comfortable language. So the everyday person in the street often thinks you should speak English to them, of course, and it's wrong. It's just plain wrong. So I love that, emerging bilingualism. Thank you, I will remember that. Anything else before I hand over? Can I just say one more thing, that if you want, some of you may want references, you may want to know more, and I have written a book called Time to Talk, which has got lots more examples of the good practice I saw, and there are some flyers there if you want to pick one up, which give you a massive discount. I have to say, on the other hand, it's probably cheaper on Amazon because most things are. I assume you have Amazon delivering here as everywhere else anyway. But it's been really, really lovely to work with you this evening, and thank you very much indeed.